She was gone. Just like that. The space beside me in bed still held the shape of her body, but it had grown cold hours ago. On the nightstand, her note said only 5 words, "I can't do this anymore." How could someone who had become my entire world vanish so completely, taking my heart with her like it was something she could pack in her suitcase? If you've ever felt that crushing weight of abandonment, that moment when your future shatters before your eyes, stay with me. This is a story about love, loss, and what happens when the person who was supposed to be your forever becomes just another memory. If this resonates with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories that explore the complicated terrain of the human heart. My name is Daniel, and I met Eliza on the kind of autumn day that poets write about. The leaves were turning golden, and the air had that perfect crispness that makes you feel alive. I was sketching in the park, a hobby I'd picked up after my divorce 2 years earlier, when she sat down on the bench across from me, opened a worn copy of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and disappeared into its pages. There was something magnetic about her concentration, the way her dark curls fell across her face as she read, occasionally tucking a strand behind her ear with slender fingers. I found myself drawing her instead of the landscape, trying to capture the quiet intensity in her expression. When she finally looked up and caught me staring, I expected anger or embarrassment. Instead, she smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and created tiny creases at their corners. "Am I more interesting than the trees?" she asked, closing her book. "Infinitely," I replied, and that was the beginning. Eliza was unlike anyone I'd ever met. A literature professor with a passion for magical realism and a laugh that could make strangers turn their heads. She spoke with her hands when excited, drank her coffee black, and had a collection of vintage typewriters that she actually used. She wrote poems on scraps of paper and left them in my pockets to find later. Our relationship progressed with the kind of ease that makes you believe in fate. Weekend trips to coastal towns where we'd walk barefoot on winter beaches. Long conversations over bottles of wine that lasted until dawn. The comfortable silence of Sunday mornings with newspapers spread across my kitchen table. Within 6 months, she had moved into my apartment, filling it with books and plants and life. "You make me feel safe," she told me one night as we lay tangled in sheets, the city lights casting shadows across her face. "Like I've found home." I believed her. That was my first mistake. Looking back, there were signs, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The way she would sometimes go quiet, her eyes focused on something distant I couldn't see. How she kept certain parts of herself locked away, changing the subject whenever I asked about her family or her past relationships. The nightmares that would wake her gasping for air, but that she refused to discuss in the morning light. "Everyone has ghosts," she'd say with a shrug. "Some are just louder than others." I respected her boundaries, thinking that time would build enough trust for her to share those darker corners. That was my second mistake. The first real crack appeared on her birthday. I'd planned a surprise party, inviting colleagues from her university and the few friends she'd mentioned. When she walked in and saw the room full of people, her face didn't register joy or even surprise, but something closer to terror. She made it through the evening with a smile that never reached her eyes, but later that night, I found her sitting on our bathroom floor, breathing into her hands. "I can't be what you want me to be," she whispered when I knelt beside her. "I'm not good at being known." I should have listened more carefully to those words. Instead, I pulled her close and promised that I only wanted her to be herself. "Whatever that means," I said. "However that looks." For a while, things improved. Spring came, and with it, a lightness returned to our relationship. We planted a garden on our small balcony. She accepted a position to teach summer courses. We talked about traveling to Colombia, the setting of her beloved Marquez novels. I started looking at rings. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was at work when her name flashed on my screen. Daniel, her voice was tight, controlled in a way that immediately set off alarms. "I need to go away for a while." What's happening? Are you okay? I'm fine. It's just, something's come up. Family stuff. I'll explain when I get back. When will that be? A pause. I don't know yet. She was gone for 3 weeks. No calls, just occasional text messages assuring me she was alive. When she returned, there was a new distance in her eyes, a hardness around her mouth that hadn't been there before. She wouldn't talk about where she'd been or what had happened, only that her father had been ill and she'd needed to take care of things. I discovered later that her father had died 5 years earlier. Another lie in what I would eventually realize was a carefully constructed fiction. Summer faded into fall, and with it, our relationship began its slow, painful unraveling. Eliza started staying late at the university. Her poems stopped appearing in my pockets. She flinched sometimes when I touched her unexpectedly. We still shared a bed, but the space between us grew wider each night. What's happening to us? I finally asked one evening as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed like those of a stranger. Nothing is happening to us. This is just who I am. No, I said, feeling a surge of anger that surprised me. This isn't who you are. Or at least, it's not who you were. Maybe you never really knew me, she replied, her voice soft but cutting. The argument that followed was our first real fight, raw and honest in a way we hadn't been for months. I accused her of withdrawing, of building walls. She called me controlling, said I had created a version of her in my mind that didn't exist. I can't be your salvation story, Daniel, she said, tears streaming down her face. I'm not here to make you feel complete. That's not what I want, I insisted, though her words had struck closer to truth than I wanted to admit. We made up that night, the kind of passionate reconciliation that feels like a breakthrough but solves nothing. In the morning, the distance remained, perhaps even wider than before. The next few weeks became a dance of avoidance and forced normalcy. We went through the motions of our relationship, cooking dinner, watching movies, occasionally making love, but something essential had broken. I found myself watching her when she didn't notice, trying to reconcile the woman I'd fallen for with this increasingly remote stranger. Then came the morning I woke to find her gone, leaving nothing but that 5-word note and the hollow space in my chest where my heart used to be. I spent the first week in a daze, expecting her to return, to explain. I called her phone until it was disconnected. I went to the university, only to learn she had resigned her position 2 weeks earlier. Her friends, the few I knew, seemed unsurprised by her disappearance, as if they had been expecting it all along. Eliza has always been transient, one colleague told me with sympathy in her eyes. She never stays anywhere long. The second week, grief gave way to anger. I tore through our apartment, looking for clues, for some explanation of who she really was. I found little. Eliza had lived lightly, leaving few traces. But in the back of her closet, I discovered a box I'd never seen before, containing a passport with a different last name, photographs of her with people I didn't recognize, and letters addressed to someone named Claire. The truth began to take shape. Eliza, or whatever her real name was, had been running from something or someone. Our relationship had been a temporary shelter, a pause in a journey I knew nothing about. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it shifted something in my understanding. Months passed. I moved to a different apartment, unable to live surrounded by memories of her. I threw myself into work, avoided dating, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of dark curls on the street and my heart would stop, but it was never her. A year after she left, a package arrived at my office. No return address, postmarked from a city in Spain. Inside was a first edition of 100 Years of Solitude, and a letter written on the kind of paper she used to leave in my pockets. Daniel, it began, I've written this letter 100 times in my head. There is no explanation I can offer that would justify what I did to you. The truth is complicated and ugly and not entirely mine to tell. But you deserve to know that what we had was real, even if I wasn't. You loved me better than anyone ever has, and in another life, one where I was braver or less broken, I would have stayed. I'm sorry for the heart I stole. I wish I could give it back. Please find someone worthy of it. It wasn't closure, not really. But it was something, an acknowledgement that what we had shared had meant something to her too, that her leaving wasn't entirely about me. 2 more years passed. I dated occasionally, even had a relationship that lasted several months, but something in me remained guarded, waiting for the other person to disappear. I continued sketching, finding that art helped process the lingering questions Eliza had left behind. Then, on another autumn day, so similar to the one when we'd met that it felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke, I saw her. She was sitting in the same park, on the same bench, reading a different book. Her hair was shorter, and there was a new maturity in her face, but it was undeniably her. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure whether to approach or walk away. Before I could decide, she looked up and saw me. The recognition in her eyes was immediate, followed by a complex mix of emotions I couldn't fully read. She closed her book and stood, hesitating before walking toward me. "Daniel," she said, my name sounding both familiar and strange on her lips. "Eliza," I replied, then corrected myself. "Or is it Claire?" A sad smile crossed her face. "It's Eliza now. Legally. Finally." We walked through the park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet, and she told me her story, the real one this time. About growing up with an abusive father who had connections to dangerous people. About testifying against him and entering witness protection. About creating new identities and leaving them behind whenever she feared she had been found. About how falling in love with me had made her want to stop running, but how a warning from her handler had sent her fleeing again. "The day I left you was the hardest day of my life," she said, her voice breaking. "Harder than testifying, harder than identifying my father's body when he was finally killed in prison. Because leaving you was a choice I made, even though it felt like I had no choice at all." I listened, feeling the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. The mysterious phone call, the unexplained absence, the fear I'd sometimes seen in her eyes, it all made sense now. Not in a way that erased the pain, but in a way that gave it context. "Why are you here now?" I asked when she finished. "Isn't it still dangerous?" She shook her head. "It's over. The last of my father's associates were arrested 6 months ago. I'm free to be whoever I want now." She looked at me with those eyes I'd never quite forgotten. I came back to apologize properly. To explain. Not to ask for forgiveness or a second chance, I know I don't deserve either. We sat in silence for a while, watching the world go by around us. I felt a strange calmness, the kind that comes with finally understanding something that has haunted you. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said eventually. "I had to move on. But understanding why you left, it helps." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I never stopped loving you, you know. Even when I was someone else, somewhere else." "I know," I said, and realized it was true. Whatever else had been false about our relationship, the love had been real. We parted that day with no promises, no expectations. Just two people who had once meant everything to each other, acknowledging the truth of their shared past. I watched her walk away, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was taking my heart with her. The girl who stole my heart never gave it back, not in the way you might expect. Instead, through pain and absence and eventual truth, she taught me something about the resilience of that heart. How it can break and still beat, how it can love and lose and somehow find the courage to love again. Life isn't a fairy tale where everyone gets their happily ever after. Sometimes people come into our lives for a season, change us irrevocably, and then leave. The real story isn't about getting back what was taken, it's about what we build from what remains. Eliza and I did meet again, many times over the following years. Not as lovers, but as two people with a complicated history and a genuine care for each other's well-being. She found her calling writing books that help children deal with trauma. I eventually met someone who didn't make me fear abandonment, who loved me patiently through the lingering trust issues Eliza had left behind. And sometimes, on autumn days when the light hits just right, I still sketch in that park. Not looking for ghosts or second chances, but appreciating how even the painful chapters of our stories shape who we become. How hearts that have been stolen and broken can still find their way to wholeness, different, perhaps, but stronger in the mended places. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever loved and lost and wondered how to find your way forward, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the most powerful thing about sharing our stories is discovering we're not alone in them. And neither are you.